here's analysis on COP26, which will start very shortly, and that stunning accusation of dishonesty from the French president. Let's bring in my Sky News political editor colleague, Andrew Clennell. He joins me now live from Glasgow. We'll get to Glasgow in a moment, Andrew, but I've got to ask you about this fallout from Australia scrapping the French submarine deal. It played out in and around the weekend's G20 in Rome. First, we heard the US President Joe Biden throwing Australia under the bus in his one-on-one with the French president. Let's have a listen.
What happened was, to use an English phrase, what we did was clumsy. It was not done with a lot of grace. I was under the impression that France had been informed long before that the deal was not going through. I honest to God did not know you had not been.
And the Prime Minister says they were informed back in June. Then in a scrum with Australian journalists, I have to say, desperate for a bit of a headline, Emmanuel Macron had this to say about Scott Morrison.
Do you think he lied to you?
I don't think. I know.
Right, you're all there on the ground, Andrew. It smacks a bit of domestic politics playing out for the Frenchman. He's got an election, as I said, in April. And, of course, we shouldn't shy away from doing what's in Australia's national interest. But you're there. How do you see it?
Well, I have to say, Peter, the press conference of Scott Morrison was about 20 minutes after Macron spoke there. And it's one of the occasions I've seen Scott Morrison most rattled. So I guess no one likes to be accused of lying. Now, he says he warned the French he was going off their conventional subs, but he didn't tell them about AUKUS. He says he couldn't tell them about AUKUS until it was stitched up, essentially. So he says, you know, it's in Australia's national interest what's happened. But Macron made the point that, so you've got to report in 18 months, so good luck. That's what Macron said. And I guess in a way that's true, in the sense that we've got this promise from the British and Americans now to give us the technology, which is great, but we're just so far away from this thing. I mean, you and I have spoken about the 2040, 2050 problem before. 2040 before you get a boat in the water. So I think that's difficult for Scott Morrison. I think the other issue for him is that, you know, it raises the odd character question, which he's had issues with before, whether it's I don't hold a hose, it's not a race, whatever. So it's messy, but I do agree with you that most Australians won't care about the French. They won't really care. No. In fact, it might benefit Morrison, Macron having a go at him. To me, the more concerning aspect was Biden. Now, maybe he is just, you know, trying to get...
I agree with you on that point.
But on the other hand, we're supposed to be entering this AUKUS agreement with these guys, and if one of them is not too happy with us, the major superpower we've relied on since the 1940s, that's concerning.
Yeah, Biden felt like a bit of a fair weather friend. I suspect he won't be there at the time of the next US election, but we'll see. And I don't think any Australians that worried about the French. Couldn't agree with you more there. And, of course, a lot of media call them an ally. They're not an ally. We have traditional allies. US is the predominant one there. So let's go on now if we can. You're in Scotland there for the climate meeting. There were supposed to be climate elements in the G20 communique, but they were carved out. And the media reporting of the G20 climate negotiations, whether it all ended up in tears, a bit of a flop. There was supposed to be a deal from the advanced economies of the G20 to phase out coal by 2030. That was knocked back. It was rejected. Of course, there was also a rejection of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees rather than the usual 2 degrees. Now, this doesn't bode well for Glasgow. So many of the big players, I just went through that in my editorial, Andrew, are not going to be there. What should we expect?
Well, yes, we talk about climate change. I wish the climate would change here, Peter, because it's absolutely freezing. But I've got to say that it looks like COP26 is dead in the water already. That's the point. And I've got to say, Scott Morrison might wonder, particularly with Queensland votes in mind, if he had to go net zero by 2050. I know the UK and US wanted that, but, I mean, other countries like India, China, Russia, they're not committing to that. And that was the sticking point at the G20. So even before we got to these COP26 talks, and you point out the Russian and Chinese leaders aren't here, India, China and Russia made sure that communique didn't commit to global net zero by 2050, just in or around the middle of the century. So a lot more wishy-washy. And so out of this, somehow Boris Johnson has got to get this win on climate, this better commitment than what he's going to end up with. I mean, we had Prince Charles at the G20 saying last chance saloon, he'll be here again. You've got this push from Britain and America. But it just seems to me it's the age-old problem. You can't get India and China on board, and Narendra Modi won't do net zero by 2050. And, you know, it's very problematic. Scott Morrison is not the focus at the moment, put it that way. I mean, there was sort of this view in Australia, particularly from Morrison's opponents, that he would cop a bit of flack here, and he might still, over not having a stronger medium-term target. But the focus is more around what China and India are doing and how the world can't really come to an effective agreement on this at the moment.
Well, if you watch this program, you'll know I've been saying pretty much the same thing for a good 8 months. I mean, the writing's been on the wall with those so-called developing economies, but particularly India. I mean, they've got 100 million people that don't even have power. We know that China's not going to take a backward step militarily or economically, and that means fossil fuels. And I think the difficulty for Scott Morrison is he's got a choice to make. If all the big emitters, and I think you've got 4 out of the top 5 big emitters, are not signing on to net zero by 2050, will the Prime Minister now make a binding commitment? Or will he say, look, I'm sorry, we're 1% of emissions in the absence of the big players, we'll only make an in-principle commitment? Or will he go the whole hog and sign Australia up to something that's meaningless in environmental terms, but by God, he'll pay a political price for?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think he will go the whole hog because I think he's come out and announced it. He's got the Nationals on board. And so it's kind of too late. But as I just said, and as you're saying, it does raise the question, did Scott Morrison have to do it? And could it cost him politically, particularly in the resources states? I guess his argument always is no change till 2030. It's only going to happen when the technology happens, just like the iPhone sprang from nowhere. And how far down the track are we with that sort of technology? So don't worry now. It's only a 2050 target. But still, there's some mileage to be made from the right, I guess, in terms of blue-collar workers. Pretty hard for Labor to make that mileage, though, isn't it, when they want more action on climate change?
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister, though, going for a 4th term, is going to worry about his base. You stay warm. Andrew Clennell, we'll speak to you later in the week. Thank you.